Hey, Calvary family, it is great to be with you today. Here we are picking up in Genesis today. We're in chapter 34. And so, up to this point in time, we have been seeing Jacob. He is the one that's been the promised child, and the promises are going through him, but his name means heel catcher, and he has been living up to that name. And where we dropped off last time, we saw Jacob wrestling with God, and it said Jacob prevailed. And that means that he finally lost to God and stopped scheming. He had this born again experience to God. And he's walking differently now. I mean, physically, spiritually, he's walking differently. He has a new name. It is Israel, and that is governed by God.
Yeah. Now, regardless of Jacob's change of heart, his children are still going to suffer that same sinful trait that their fathers had, his grandfather and their great grandfather. They're all they're a bit of a trickster. They've all got a little bit of the serpent in them, And so Simeon and Levi, they're going to deceive a neighboring tribe. And you're going to have the story play out, and in vengeance, which in their mind is, of course, justice, they're going to kill every male of the tribe. They're going to obliterate an entire legacy.
Yeah, so Shechem is going to be doomed. But this is a good example of why God gave the law. When he gave the law, he told Israel how they were to execute judgment. And it was going to be an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That is, there's going to be limits on how you can execute or repay for something that somebody's done to you, right? Because as humans, we cannot really handle justice. We don't mete it out well. And so we express our hurt by hurting somebody back in a greater way. Now, when Jesus came, he had a lot to say about this to his followers. You can read the Sermon on the Mount on that.
Yeah.
We'll be hitting that in January. Yeah, a lot stricter, indeed.
Yeah, so let's see, we're going to chapter 35. We have a rededication of Jacob. The killings must have played a toll on him, and now God tells him to build an altar. And so part of that is that Jacob now cracks down on the worship of foreign gods in his group. So up until this point, you kind of assume, oh, well, they're all worshiping it. That's not. They actually have idols that they're worshiping. They're thrown out, and now that tribe is actually becoming the tribe of Israel under one God.
Yeah, and so now we're going to see God being called by the name, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
Now, let's see here. Rachel, that's okay. So Jacob's favorite wife passes away, but not before she has another child. Jacob now has 2 children with Rachel, both of which will be important later on in the story. He's going to greatly favor them. He has a favorite wife, and so you're going to see that play out in his own choices there.
And the dysfunction in the family as well.
Greatly so.
And so Rachel's buried in Bethlehem, and the place of her burial is actually called Rachel's tomb. You could go there today and see it. Well, actually, you can't go there today, but it's there.
As of right now.
Yeah.
So let's see. So we're going to go into...
Look at verse 22. Just a quick to point out. Reuben, it's just one verse. Reuben lays with his one of his wives, one of the concubines. This was a Noah-Ham move here, another power play, and it backfires on Reuben. He's trying to scheme. It didn't work. Now remember, Reuben is Jacob's firstborn son. And so he just removed himself from the blessing. After Reuben was Simeon and then Levi, and then those two did the whole thing with Shechem and pulled that whole murderous thing going on. And so they're removed from it as well. And so the blessing's going to go to Joseph. And this is what's going to set us up for the rest of the book of Genesis.
And so you're seeing a pattern play out here with these sons and these dishonorable deeds. It's going to be important here moving into... as we see Joseph play out. So we're going to chapter 36. Isaac passes away. Jacob and Esau grow distant. They cannot coexist as a single nation. It's tragic, but they split apart. And it is meant to be tragic. So Esau is called Edom like a couple times there. It's not just once, not just twice. He's called Edom. And remember, Jacob is now called Israel. The conflict between these two nations, we're going to see it for books, like going into the kings, going into seeing all of the kings of Israel, that conflict, you're going to see that conflict between those two nations play out. And you're meant to remember it as like it's a repetition of that conflict between two brothers.
Yes.
It's tragic. It's supposed to be tragic.
Absolutely. And a lot of prophecies regarding Edom and so forth. And that moves us. So in chapter 36, we now have the genealogy of Esau. And remember, this is common. We saw this with Cain as well. You see, we had a genealogy of Cain that was given before the chosen line. Now Esau's genealogy is given before the chosen line of Jacob. But notice that in the genealogy, Esau's organized and has chiefs and kings almost like 1,000 years before Jacob did. It's just like Cain's descendants were much more advanced than Seth's. So now we move into the Joseph story.
Chapter 37. So the story of Joseph, this is the last arc of the Genesis scroll. And he's a major character. Everything's kind of been building up until this point. We want to add some context for you guys before we go into it. There's been kind of one, I don't want to say it's a misreading, but there's been a lens that we've read it through where we want to correct some ideas and just put some context into place. This is not a rags to riches story, right? It's not about a story of an underdog who's going to, like, through bravado, pull himself up by his bootstraps and overcome great adversity and get himself into this place. Joseph is the next in line for the inheritance. He's got the favor of his father upon him. His brothers who have been disqualified, they hate and fear him for that. In this culture, and this is really important, the brother who inherits is going to take charge. He's going to be in charge of taking care of his brothers, their security, their family safety. It depends on the tribal chief. And so what does Joseph do with this immense responsibility? He starts waving it around in their face and acting like an idiot.
Yeah, he's not nice. I mean, he's acting actually like a tyrant. God has his hand on him. God has a calling upon him, but how does he handle it? Well, he starts handling it initially with boasting and arrogance, and that's going to get taken out of him. And that path for any of us, getting boasting, arrogance, pride, taking out of us is never easy. Okay, so Joseph has this dream, and of course, what do you do with a dream when you have one like Joseph did? Well,
bring it to the family.
Yeah, right. Go tell your brothers, oh, you're going to bow down to me one day. Yeah. And of course, because he's in a large family, there's already all these power plays that have been going on. We've already seen that.
And they don't want to hear it, right?
They don't want to hear that dream at all.
And he has a second dream as well. That's the one with the 11 stars and the sun and the moon. They bow down. So remember, we saw that in Revelation, actually. And here it seems that Jacob knows exactly what he's talking about.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
And he rebukes him for it, too, which is kind of funny. So just something to connect it back to Revelation there.
Yeah, and then verse 12 is where the story really starts picking up speed, because Joseph is sent to go check on his brothers, sort of doing a management thing there. He's overseeing them. And they see him in the wilderness, and they decide, hey, let's go kill him.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. We've seen that before, right? Two brothers in the wilderness. And anyways,
killing.
Genesis, it's great. So Reuben, the oldest and already a disgraced son, actually has a moment of mercy, and he seeks to save his brother's life. He's too late, though, right? He saves his life, but he's too late to rescue him from the plots of the rest of the brothers.
And notice Judah here, he has the idea of selling Joseph into slavery. Like, let's not kill him, let's just sell him into slavery. Yeah. Now, Judah is interesting. It's the tribe that the Messiah is going to come through. But he's not acting godly yet at all. In fact, we're going to have to wait quite a while for that. Everybody needs transformation. The first transformation is going to happen, though, in Joseph. That's where it's going to start. When transformation happens, Jesus always gets seen. And you're going to start seeing it with Joseph. In fact, many people, when they're reading the Joseph story, pick out all these allusions to Jesus and like what Jesus will actually do.
Call that a type.
Yeah, what that's called. Prophetic type.
Yeah. So something funny about the whole slavery thing. It's ironic. It's Ishmael's descendants who buy him. Remember Ishmael with the whole prophecy, like he's going to serve his brother, Isaac. And now here there's a flip on that, and it's Isaac's descendant is sold into slavery to Ishmael's descendants. Poetic irony. That's great.
Okay, and that moves us into chapter 38.
The interlude. Yeah. So remember, we just talked about Judah. Read the story yourself here. We're not going to summarize it, but you get the story between Judah and Tamar. You get the story. It's similar to the other stories with the other sons. There's something that they do. They act dishonorably. What's interesting is it's set later, though. It's kind of out of the order of the rest of them. What Judah does is dishonorable. But sometimes that which is dishonorable, God is going to use for great honor. And in this whole encounter and this relationship between Judah and Tamar, this is the line that the Messiah is going to come through. The promise of that snake crusher, we saw all the way at the beginning, that's going to run through this whole line. Just something interesting to pick up there.
Okay, and that moves us into chapter 39. And in 39, we pick up now Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, and Potiphar buys him as a slave. Notice verse 2 and 3, it says the Lord was with Joseph. So everything's changing for Joseph now, right? He goes from a slave and he's going to be in charge of all of Potiphar's household, but then Potiphar's wife tries to get him to sleep with her, and he refuses her, which she doesn't take lightly. And so she starts amping up her game, cornering him and so forth. And then, she finally gets him into this spot where he's alone and has him cornered, and he flees from her. And he says this great line. He says, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?"
It's going to cost Joseph everything.
Everything. That's right.
And so that leads to kind of an interesting moment here where when he was a child and he was all, snobbish and self-righteous, and it ended with him being thrown into a pit. Okay, it's understandable. We track with that. Now that he's older and he's more humble and he's got a sense of honor, and he uses his authority righteously, like a righteous man, he still ends up in the same place. He's thrown into a pit. He's thrown into prison. And so the question becomes, like, if I'm behaving wickedly and I end up in a pit, or I behave righteously and I end up in a pit, like, well, what's the point? Why shouldn't I gain what I can when I can? What's the point in doing things rightly at all? That's certainly what's going through Joseph's mind here.
And, if you look at it, it doesn't seem to matter at first. But God's not done. And that's the way it always is. Sin is always front-loaded, right? I mean, there's always this reward that we get from sin on the front side. Righteousness, though, righteousness is going to bear a fruit, and nothing can compare with that. Yeah. And so costly indeed, it's going to cost, but the reaping of righteousness is going to be so much greater.
And once again with Joseph, if he was never thrown into the pit, he never would have learned how to handle authority to serve people. It's a hard lesson. It's taking him years. It's going to cost him years to learn this lesson. But in the end, it's not just his family he's going to bless. Remember that promise all the way back with Abraham, through you, it's all these nations are going to be blessed. Abraham, did he ever end up doing that? Isaac, Jacob, they were so caught up in their own trickery, they were never able to bless anybody. Joseph's going to bless the nations. We're going to see that in a couple of chapters. It's interesting. He's the first one. It seems like he's able to do that where his grandfathers, his great-grandfather, where his father failed. But it took him a hard lesson to learn how to do that.
So from the pit, God's going to rise him up again, and he's going to begin actually in the dungeon. He's going to become second in charge of prison. And from there, you're going to see second in charge of all of Egypt. So thanks for being with us in this day, and we'll pick up with you next week. See you on Sunday.